Welcome to On-Site Insights, a series of podcasts by On-Site Ventures about deep tech and the people behind it. We invest in the next groundbreaking idea.
Welcome everyone. This is our 6th live session of On-Site Insights. On-Site Insights is a series of LinkedIn audio events with the goal to bring our portfolio companies and the people behind them into the spotlight. My name is Klaus. I'm a general partner and founder of On-Site Ventures, a venture capital fund dedicated to invest in early stage deep tech companies. Today, I have the honor to have Markus Gstöttner, co-founder and CEO at Clock.bio, as my guest. Clock.bio is pioneering advancements in cellular reprogramming and the development of therapies to combat age-related diseases. Thank you, Markus, for being with us today.
Thanks, Klaus. Nice to be here.
Markus, so we would get started with some background introduction. Markus, could you start by telling our listeners a bit about yourself and your way into the startup space?
Yeah, of course, happy to. So my background's, born and raised in Austria. Studied initially economics in the UK. Stuck around in the UK for a few years. My first job was in development economics, working in India. Then came back and worked in management consulting with McKinsey, which was a very interesting and exciting journey for me for several years. But I knew that I wanted to leave as an entrepreneur and hopefully found something of my own. And my journey into the startup space, as you ask, actually began with the co-founding of a cultured meat startup that's called Meatable. Which I did alongside Mark Cotter, my co-founder, and 2 Dutch co-founders, Dan and Krijn, of ours. And that happened at the back end of my McKinsey journey. And that was probably my first interaction with the whole sphere. And more recently, but we'll get to that, I have been involved with Clock.bio with a common denominator, namely co-founded again together with my prior co-founder, Mark Cotter, who's based in Cambridge. And also a common denominator working with induced pluripotent stem cells, hiPSCs. But yeah, happy to talk about it in more detail.
Thank you, Markus. And what personal experiences would you say or influences have shaped your career path and leadership style?
So I would say, breaking it down into a career path and leadership style, I think the career path really was or has been driven so far by a sense of curiosity and intuition. So I think I've always had that dual interest in business and entrepreneurship on the one hand and public and social sectors on the other hand. So I think that's what drove me into studying economics in the first place. That then kind of led me to development economics, and that then led me to consulting, because consulting is one of the very few places that allows you to do both kind of a fair amount of business related, but also public sector related topics. And I think the founding of Meatable and then later on of Clock.bio was driven by trying to work with frontier technology to address topics that are, on the one hand, addressing big potential markets, but also addressing societal questions that are relevant to contribute to. And I think in terms of my leadership style, I guess, other people will be better judges of that, but I think I have benefited from being exposed to different environments in the private and public sectors. And I think some of the few common denominators that I kind of was able to learn from is that good leaders that I love to work with were people who, listened carefully, took different opinions into account, then made a decision based on everyone's view, but then also stuck to it and defended it unless kind of the arguments and the data really changed. And they usually kept their calm also in challenging situations, which is something that's quite contagious and kind of reassures the rest of the team. And I would hope, again, other people will be better judges of that, but I would hope that I kind of at least positively influenced my leadership style.
Interesting. I couldn't agree more. So in Clock.bio, what's the founding team? How does it look like? I mean, you mentioned Mark Cotter and yourself. Who else is involved?
So we are a relatively big founding team, which has, I would say, a good mix of, a robust scientific background, which is required for the questions we try and tackle, and then commercial experience. But, to give you a bit of the lay of the land, so next to Mark, who's obviously been, an academic researcher, surgeon, but also the CEO of Bit.bio, there are a couple of stem cell scientists, Kobe and Jan in particular, but also more recently, Rodrigo, our CTO, who understands stem cells and induced pluripotent stem cells extremely well. One of our co-founders and advisors, Tillman, is an expert in the CRISPR world. And another co-founder, Grant, an advisor, is an expert in bioinformatics. And I think it's that mix of stem cell biology, CRISPR, and bioinformatics together with, the commercial drive behind all of that really makes the composition of our team.
Interesting. So it's really necessary to bring together a lot of expertise and knowledge. So in Clock.bio, what's the story of founding this unique company? So
the story of founding, and I might just relate it a little bit with what we do because it's just interconnected, but the story of founding is a relatively simple one in terms of that, we all grow older. Many of us have the luck to grow older, both individually, but also most societies, approach longer and longer life expectancy. As we grow old, many of us unfortunately fall sick, subject to often a mix of different cardiovascular cancers and neurodegenerative diseases. And, trying to find better treatments to increase health span with growing longevity is the core of our mission. And that kind of started, and that's also the origin story from first principles. As in, everyone understands that, human conditions of the human organism show themselves at the level of the human cell. So over time, our cells accumulate errors. Aging can be described as this accumulation of errors that leads to loss of cell function, in the end, cell death. There is, and we can't go into that now, but if there are questions, I'm happy to kind of start addressing it at least. But there is a set of so-called hallmarks of aging that's agreed in the literature, that these errors show themselves in things such as telomere attrition, mitochondrial dysfunctions. Some of them are relatively general. Some of them are relatively kind of well related to specific disease indications in the human body. And as they accumulate, they are kind of the cellular phenotypes of age-related diseases and age-related conditions. Now, the interesting thing is, and that's where really Clock.bio comes in, is that whilst all somatic cells age, stem cells have the ability to resist aging. It's a relatively simple and fundamental fact of life, because if stem cells didn't have the ability to resist aging, aging would become inheritable and the species wouldn't really be around anymore. And what we are able to do, and that's where it all started in the academic research, is that we've developed an aging intervention or an aging model that allows us to force stem cells to age in a way that we really faithfully recreate the agreed hallmarks of aging in a specific stem cell, which then triggers something that was not really understood or known before, namely that although we force them to age and they temporarily have all the hallmarks of aging in them, they then start a spontaneous reversal of age. As in 2 weeks in, they suddenly become young and healthy again. And so the hallmarks of aging are gone. And we believe that that's extremely powerful, because if the hallmarks of aging are the cellular phenotypes of age-related disease, then understanding how a human cell, a stem cell in that case, can quote-unquote heal them and defend against them will very likely have implications for also finding better therapeutic approaches for the human organism. And that really then led to the idea of founding Clock.bio, and that's what we do. I'm very happy to talk about next steps, but that's kind of the origin story and the mission and the fundamental approach.
That's really exciting. It is a very tempting topic, as you can imagine. How are you seeing the uniqueness of your technology in this whole area that you're working in?
So, I mean, first and foremost, obviously, this is a huge field, right? There are many different conditions. There is aging in itself, and there's many questions to solve in order to improve health span with growing longevity. So I guess there's a lot of room for different approaches, and there's kind of, I think, no reason to be overly competitive at this stage. What I would see, however, as a kind of unique set of aspects of our approach is that we're not pursuing one specific hypothesis. We want to understand how stem cells are able to self-rejuvenate if forced to age in a way that represents cellular aging in human cells. And so we want to decode in a relatively comprehensive and fast way how biology is able to do something that we really didn't know of a few years back. And so I think that allows us to be comprehensive and unbiased. And that's an important word, because what we try and do is really, in the first step, understand which parts of the human genome are active in that self-rejuvenation in stem cells. And by running large-scale CRISPR screens, we have a really reliable approach that we've tried and tested and have been doing for several months now, where we can really tell whether any specific gene in its absence leads to a differentiation in rejuvenation outcomes, which is an unbiased way of saying, by the end of this, we'll know, okay, which genes seem to be relevant for rejuvenation in stem cells, and then validate and prioritize them for clinical applications. And I think that comprehensiveness and the unbiased approach is a core strength, because we want to understand existing biology rather than pursuing specific hypotheses and observe correlations. And then next step, I think it's an added benefit that we will be working or are working with human cells from the get-go rather than others. And along the way, develop a platform that could be applied also to different other contexts, and we generate a wealth of data, because what we do in our first step is a genome-wide screen where we understand which genes are active in rejuvenation in stem cells. And I think that data, in a world where data is extremely precious, could also be highly relevant, because it's not only a lot, but it's also, again, unbiased and across the full human genome.
And what would you say, who is buying your technology, your expertise? Who will be the target customers?
So I think in the end, for this obviously to make sense, the target customers and the recipient will have to be people who suffer from different age-related diseases. I think in this very first step, what we're doing is, understanding the lay of the land, which genes are relevant for rejuvenation in iPSCs. We are very close to having a kind of fairly comprehensive understanding, which we'll have later this year. And then in the first step, we need to then validate our findings and see, which of those genes have what effect also in somatic cells, and how can we map them to specific disease indications, and can we do early pharmacological validation, at least at the cellular level with them. And from there, we want to have, very robust and specific discussions, not only with prospective future investors, but also with pharmacological companies for whom not only the targets we identify, but also the associated data could be relevant. So I think that is our first, if we want to call it, set of partners that we will and need to speak to.
Thank you. Well, then looking a bit into the near future, what are Clock.bio's main objectives, let's say, for the next couple of years? How do you plan to get there?
So, in the big picture, our main objectives are first identification of the most likely genes that are relevant for rejuvenation, then validating them, and then prepping them for preclinical work and going into preclinical work against specific disease indications. How do we want to get there? First and foremost, the genome-wide screen, where we understand which parts of the genome are relevant for rejuvenation in stem cells. Second, validation and prioritization, which will break down into different components, and I can kind of mention a few. So first and foremost, understand how a specific gene, where we've observed that it is relevant for rejuvenation in stem cells, how that rejuvenating effect can also be replicated in somatic cells, in different somatic cells, including old patients' donor cells, to really have the proof also in a human somatic cell, not only in a stem cell. Then there is early stage pharmacological validation, where we will work with existing drugs and compounds that are known to work through the pathway of our genes, that we can show that also through those pathways we can actually address specific hallmarks of aging. And then there's a totally separate set of work streams that obviously is connected, where we'll work with bioinformatics tools to map our rejuvenation genes to specific disease indications. And then with that, we'll have a validated and from there also prioritized set of rejuvenation targets, which we then will have mapped also at that stage against specific disease indications, where we'll then need to go into preclinical work and assessing different modalities that could work against the disease indications and the pathways we've identified. And that's our absolute priority, our set of priorities over the next 2 years. And the focus until the end of this year is what we call actors of rejuvenation factors, so understanding which genes we talk about, And then the next 2 years will be focused on that prioritization and validation, and then the preclinical work. Ideally already together with a set of partners who would like to take it to the next level with us.
And in a much wider, longer time horizon, are you seeing that there is an impact of the technology of Clock.bio on the future of age-related disease treatments and the human health span?
Yes, that very much is our vision. So we firmly believe that if human stem cells are able to effectively undo the damage of time at a cellular level that is related to different disease conditions that we know and many of our kind of older relatives and friends suffer from, then understanding and kind of decoding that rejuvenation mechanism, we are very confident that we can make a significant contribution to treating one or several of these in a better way, right? And there's, of course, then the whole overlying quest of whether, apart from existing disease conditions, and whether there is anything that could relate to rejuvenating preventative effects themselves. And that's obviously also something we investigate once we have the full set of data and clarity. But our ambition really is to add a significant number of years to human health span with what we do and through the targets we identify.
And when you're seeing this whole industry since quite a while, how do you view this current market of anti-aging and regenerative medicine? And where do you see it is all heading towards in the next few years?
So I think it's clearly one of the markets that purely also driven by the demographic development of different societies that gets a lot of attention, right? And as you have attention, you'll have hypes, positive ones and negative ones. You'll have expectations, some of which will be met, some of which might not be met. We've seen that in different other markets. I've also seen that in cultured meat a few years ago. But I think it's a market and a set of efforts and companies that are here to stay. And I think at a couple of different levels, right? One is perhaps a set of, scientific approaches and therapeutic approaches that lead to quick wins, to better kind of symptomatic care, be it skincare or supplements that can help kind of people live healthier lives for longer. Then there will be a set of therapeutic approaches that just improve on the current state of the art on treating existing age-related disease, cancerous, cardiovascular, neurodegenerative. Again, either in a preventative or in a therapeutic approach. And then there's this overall quest that sometimes gets bundled up on actual, rejuvenation as in tackling aging itself. Is there something that can be done about aging itself? There is an ongoing debate on whether aging is just a sum of its parts, as in a set of diseases, or a program of its own that might drive those diseases or something else. But that's obviously kind of probably the strongest frontier for which there is no regulatory environment yet. But that I think will be moving in parallel, where it's very hard to say what will happen. But obviously it's all very interconnected. But I'm very positive that this is a set of challenges where we'll be better and better to address them and enable to help people live healthier lives for longer. But I think it will kind of move across those quick fixes and more kind of, low hurdle to entry to robust therapeutic approaches with existing barriers to entry to potential rejuvenation approaches for which the regulatory environment will actually only have to be built in most countries. And that will be driven by the sets of science and businesses that actually make contributions to the field that will then be, applying for regulatory approval.
You already mentioned that you're not really seeing it as such a competitive market, that there are so many different players involved delivering different technologies. But if you would need to point the finger on Clock.bio's ability to differentiate itself from competitors, what would you think would that be?
Very happy to address it. Just to not be misunderstood, it is, of course, a competitive market, right? There's more and more companies coming into this. What I was trying to say earlier is that there is such a huge set of prizes. Any age-related condition where you actually make a meaningful contribution is already a lifetime achievement. There's plenty of them. And then there's the overlying aging question itself that I think there will be, many winners to be made in this. And so I think that's why we are at the early stage of the market, but it is increasingly competitive with many companies being founded, including partial reprogramming approaches and so on and so forth. I think what differentiates us is that we are trying to decode an existing bit of technology and not trying and then make the most of it in a therapeutic way, and not necessarily pursue one specific academic hypothesis over another. I think what that allows us to do is to be at the initial stage very fast and comprehensive. So by the end of the year, we should know which genes are relevant for rejuvenation in stem cells, and then be very fast and focused on prioritizing those potential targets for preclinical work. And so I think that makes us being comprehensive, fast, and unbiased whilst working in human cells from the get-go. That makes our approach a very robust one for people who are interested in investing or partnering in that space. And I would say that is our set of competitive advantages at the moment.
Thank you. So as we are in Austria and in Europe, and there's always this big debate about regulatories. Regulatories are normally very strict in Europe, especially in Austria as well. So how do you anticipate any regulatory changes or advancements in technology impacting the market of cellular rejuvenation therapies?
So I think a couple of different levels to that. I think any rejuvenation therapy that will actually address existing known conditions has a potential regulatory pathway through the different treatment pathways of those existing conditions, right? So if anything relates to neurodegenerative disease, which is obviously a huge question at the moment, then there is a regulatory pathway. Only once you move out of existing regulatory pathways, of course, new ones would have to be opened up. And I guess, it's everyone's guess is as good as mine. But of course, there is usually faster movement in some areas, at least, across the pond in the US. Then you have the UK and Europe, not always moving in tandem. And then you have many different Asian markets, of course, the rest of the world. But so I think the pace at which potential new regulatory pathways will be opened will just be determined by the credibility of the insights that are being delivered to back up the case. As in, if a company like us or another company has found something that actually works not only at the cellular level, but also in the preclinical level that promises to have meaningful effects on the human organism outside of existing regulatory pathways, then the question is, where will that be filed? Where will that kind of want to be trialed? But I'm sure that things will move. But of course, some regions might move faster than others. But the good thing is also those regions, including perhaps Europe, that might be slower. Once you have regulatory certainty, you actually usually have it for good. And so I guess that's just a trade-off. But I think it depends on how many companies, how many research efforts push on people's doors hard enough for things to change. And usually they have changed also in the past.
Well, so this brings us to our last block of issues. Economically speaking, we are in a downside market, I would say. So it's not always easy to get funding for startups. How are you seeing this perspective, and how was your strategy in fundraising, and where do you stand today?
Yes, so of course, absolutely right. It's a tough market. It's a tough market generally, but it's a tough market in biotech, perhaps even in particular. And so the way we try and approach this is that on the one hand, you need to budget in higher transaction costs, I guess, than perhaps, a few years ago in terms of, things take longer, transactions are just more robustly diligenced and so on and so forth. I guess in the end, that's not necessarily a disadvantage if you have the time to invest in it, because then, you're building on a robust base with all the partners involved. But it also means that you need to start your partnership discussions, you need to start your investor discussions early enough and perhaps earlier than before. And arguably, they will also be more time consuming, particularly from a CEO perspective, but also including the wider team. In the end, if you have an idea that you believe in, that you think can make a meaningful difference, and you have the right people around it that you think can deliver it, I guess there's no choice but to go out now, be it a bull market or a bear market. And people with more experience than I also say it's good to start in a bear market because it means you'll kind of, grow in a bull one. Always easier said than done. But in the end, the idea is now, so the time is now, and we will just very much make the most of it. We have recently completed a round, but we're not yet communicating around that. We'll communicate only after the summer, and then I'm very happy to talk more about it. We will just try and weather the storm and be as robust and fast as possible in the insights we generate, and as forthcoming in terms of having discussions with potential investors and partners along the way without any really dedicated fundraising time, but it kind of is always.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on this. I think it's a great skill to learn to be very capital efficient in bear markets. All right. So at the end of our session, I would just like to take a look what any specific projects that you're currently working on, what's coming up next at Clock.bio.
So we are at this stage really focused on that genome-wide screen and what we call the Atlas of Rejuvination factors. From there, as I've mentioned, we go into prioritizing and validating them, which will keep us busy into 2025. And that's really kind of our laser-sharp focus next to generating the data and validating the platform for potential other applications. But those kind of three components, subject to a few things that we are early stage investigating that I can't yet talk about, are, I guess, the priorities, next to also scaling up the team with a couple of critical hires that will be probably happening in the Cambridge ecosystem. That obviously is super important because the initial set of people will shape this company, both in terms of data and later on products generated, but also culture build. So that's something where we invest a significant amount of time in. And those are our projects. And then, very happy to re-engage once we have completed the first iteration on the Atlas of Rejuvination factors, and then we'll take it from there.
Thank you. Yeah. So speaking for OnSite, I'm really happy to be on board Clock.bio. And so with this, I would like to conclude our session. Thank you, Markus, for being with us today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you to our listeners. I hope we could give you an interesting insight into the future of cellular coding and the road ahead in tech bio. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
That was OnSite Insights, a series of podcasts by OnSite Ventures about deep tech and the people behind it. For more information on our portfolio companies and investment strategies, visit our website, onsite.vc, and follow us on LinkedIn at OnSite Ventures.